So we had a couple of different options we could go with. We could get spray foam and get a spray foam kit and spray foam this whole thing ourselves. But we decided for how small an area it is, we were just going to do spray foam in a can and R-Max insulation. So we have 2-inch and we have 1-inch. We're doing 2-inch in all of the deep cavities right here, and then we're going to do 1-inch on the top because we can't quite get 2-inch in there. We put rosin paper down so that anything that foams out of here later will fall onto it rather than onto the floor or onto all the other surfaces in here. I'm going to go ahead and start filling this big cavity in here. Luckily this one has lots of cutouts in it so that we actually can get the foam in there at all different angles and make sure all the cavities are full. So the first thing we're doing is we're filling up the very top of the cavity. Now that cavity is full, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to come in this way and reach back in there as far as we can. And if you look really close, you can actually see the spray foam coming out of that little hole right there. And as I keep going, it's filling up into this cavity. And once it starts to come into that cavity, I do the same thing and go the opposite direction. I wanted to show you this cool little piece that comes with the kit. And what it is, it's a little nozzle that screws onto the very end of this. That way, when we did all of these holes, we're actually able to stick this all the way up in there and actually fill all the way back into here without trying to get this big nozzle up into the hole and trying to keep foam from coming everywhere. So now I'm going to go and finish this last one. This stuff can be kind of fun. The only issue you have is if you fill the crack up too much with the foam, then it starts to come out like what it did right there. And what I'll have to do is wait till it fully dries and then take a utility knife and cut it off smooth with the panel.
So a lot of the stuff we've been doing, you're not going to probably want to do because Devin and I have gone way overboard, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
On a lot of this, we've gone way overboard. But it's a really good example of just how much fun and how much detail you can get into and how enjoyable it can be if you plan ahead. The gussets are screwed right to the structural ribs, and the ribs are filled with polyurethane foam too, all the way across. So everything's tied together really well, almost glued together. Here's some details that I should probably show you before we start covering them up. This is the first sheathing we've put on the wall. I'm going to put 1/2-inch plywood on these walls, and then I'm going to adhere the beadboard, the TNG beadboard, which is only about 3/8, maybe 7/16 of an inch thick. I'm going to adhere that to this plywood, so it'll make it much easier for me to install the beadboard paneling without any fasteners showing. I'll be able to toenail with my little pin nailer right through the tongue on the beadboard, the same way I installed the beadboard on the shower. And the beadboard's going to wrap right around this cove. This is the first cove we've installed. This piece of plywood is called bending board or wally board or wiggly board, whatever you want to call it. It's 3/8, so it almost flushes out perfectly with the 1/2-inch plywood. And it can bend around almost any radius, not much tighter than this though. I actually got this radius by drawing it in SketchUp and taking a piece of the beadboard and walking it up across the radius to make sure that I'd be able to get the tongue inside the groove on each board and have a nice feathered kind of faired curve on this cove, because I want the inside of the van to look like one of those old Airstream trailers, you know, that had the cove corners everywhere. And that's going to be part of the look, a little bit Art Deco-y. Right in here, we've got all the wiring for the camera, and we've got 4 cameras that we're going to be using, the 2 in the back, which are like backup cameras. One of them's actually pointed straight down at my trailer hitch, so it'll be real easy to hook up my boat. And the other 2 cameras go on the trailer itself, so when I hook up my boat trailer, I'll be able to see exactly where the back of the trailer is while I'm backing down a boat ramp, which will be real handy. We've got all of the electric done in these little hollow walls. We've got a 110 outlet here, and we've got our sensor for the water tanks right in here. And then, and I've got a piece of wing A that'll go up this piece up to trim off the front edge of this little hollow wall, just like I do across the top of this shelf that's the headliner that goes over the driver's seat and the passenger seat. And then back here, you can see we've got switches already installed for 12 volt. Now this is for the lighting that'll be inside the cabinet that runs here. And we've got a 12 volt switch in here for the lighting that runs up inside of the shower. We've also got our main sensor panel right here for the electrical system, the solar system, which is kind of cool. So it'll be easy to access. So I'm going to have Devin bring that camera around to the back here so I can show you some of the details on the inside of the garage. This is one of the things that I'm kind of really proud about. This is the propane locker. I decided to go with propane to power up my furnace instead of using a diesel furnace. And I decided to use propane for my cooktop here as well because I wanted hot water, continuous hot water. And that's why I put in this hot water heater. It's a total propane water heater, has a little bit of DC that goes to it just for, just for the sensors and stuff. But we made the locker really special. I thought long and hard about this. I didn't want to have a single propane tank, because if I had one propane tank and I went off on a trip and it was only maybe a quarter or something, I'd be tempted to exchange it for a full one, and I'd be wasting the propane that was left in the tank. So I made the locker big enough to hold 2 tanks, so there'll always be a fresh full one, and that means I'll be able to drain the other one out completely, switch tanks, and when I get a chance, stop at a big box store or someplace and exchange the empty one. So the propane locker is built very carefully. It's out of 1/2-inch Baltic birch. We sealed it to the truck with spray foam, and I sealed every seam on the inside with sealant. And then I sprayed it with about 5 or 6 coats of varnish to make sure it could not leak. Propane is dangerous, and this is a requirement, a law requirement, that you do this anytime you're having a propane tank inside of a vehicle. There's also a piece of PVC inside the bottom of this tank, which I'll show you in a minute, and it'll drain out any propane that leaks inside that locker. Because propane's heavier than air, it'll drop right through that piece of PVC and drain out the bottom of the van, so it's super safe. This is our pump system. We've installed it on a piece of plywood so that we can slide this underneath the water heater and run one screw through it to hold it nice and still. But we've got our pump right here for the water system and our little pressure tank. So it's all pretty tight, really tight, nicely designed. And I'm still going to have lots of room back in here to store stuff. Firewood, yoga equipment, fishing rods, photography equipment, extra clothing, that kind of stuff. On this side is the solar power unit that we got from Tiny Watts. Tiny Watts has really saved us a lot. I mean, we could have screwed this up big time if we'd have tried it on our own, and we probably would have spent a fortune doing it as well. The trial and error, I've seen videos online where people had trouble, their batteries wouldn't charge, and on and on and on. I went ahead and cut a big corner here and had somebody who's a true professional engineer this whole thing. They shipped us this entire kit, all pre-assembled and pre-wired. Every wire that was in here had a label on it. So when we wired the van, we labeled everything. All we had to do once the kit came was tie those wires together, label to label. It was really, really simple. We've got 2 batteries in here, 2 lithium batteries in here. We've got room for 2 more if we want to add them. We're about to add the plumbing into the shower here. And once we do that, we'll be able to button up this wall. We've already made the panel and pre-finished it. And inside of this panel in the bedroom, we're going to have a 110 outlet. We're going to have a USB outlet, 12 volt USB, and a switch here that's a 3-way. The 3-way is going to turn on and off the lights in the center of the van. And the other end of the 3-way switch is right there by the van door. So you can come in the door, turn on the lights, go to bed and turn them off. I mean, just like living in a house. But check this out. This is the propane locker. So here's our main tank. You can see it's already hooked up with a regulator and everything in here. So we're able to test everything as we're going before we button up the interior walls. I've got room left in here for one more tank. And if you look in here real close, you'll see I got this piece of PVC in here as well that's going to drain any propane leakage out of here. We're also going to put the fill line for the fresh water tank inside this locker. We're going to run that fill line right up inside this corner. It won't interfere with the secondary propane tank at all. And that way, when I want to fill the fresh water, I'll just open this door because it's secured and it locks with a key, which is nice. So nobody will be able to mess with my fresh water intake. And I can fill the water intake right here. And we'll have an open filter right at the top of that. So, there won't ever be a vacuum in the freshwater tank, and we'll get kind of like, we won't get any sloshing or something, any water coming up out of the tanks anywhere, because this intake will be so much higher than the tank itself. This is the first piece of cabinetry that's going into the van. It's the face frame that's going to separate the garage in the back from the kind of living quarters in the front. It's the frame for the bed. It's the face frame for the refrigerator. Everything ties into this thing. This is where that frame's going to go, right across here. The refrigerator is going to sit right here, and the top of the refrigerator is kind of high, but that's what determines the elevation of my bed. I'm going to actually put the bed framing, the support for the bed, right down onto the refrigerator so I can keep the bed as low as possible. This was a pretty tricky situation right in here, because I'm going to mount the water tank. The fresh water tank is going to sit right here, and it's 12 inches tall. So that's what forced me to elevate the refrigerator up, which also pushed the elevation of the bed up. It's this kind of stuff that you got to plan for ahead of time. Drawings really, really help, and a story pole. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. This is just a stick of wood that we made so we could lay out exactly where the water tank was, we could lay out where the refrigerator went, and I was able to design this bed so it actually wraps around the refrigerator by putting the framing on each side of the refrigerator and only the plywood over the top of the refrigerator, which drops the elevation of my bed significantly, because I don't want to have to use a ladder to get up into this bed. So a story pole is really essential. And you'll probably notice that this floor here is higher than this one. We actually dropped this floor during the construction phase. This wasn't part of the original plan, but in order to get that 12-inch tall water tank in here and keep that refrigerator as low as possible, I pulled all the insulation out of this section of the floor in the garage, but I left the insulation in the section of the floor where I'm actually going to be living, because I don't need an insulated floor right in here. I can't believe it. I'm finally about to put up the last piece of bending plywood. Once I'm sure they're fit properly, then I draw them right tight to the backing. And then I can take this one now and get these to flush up pretty close. There we go. So I usually will put 2 screws through each panel and then check the fit before I drive them in all the way and draw them right to the backing. I'm getting a really nice curve through here. And if these panels aren't perfectly flush, no problem, because I'm going to span right over them with all of the T&G beadboard paneling that's going to go across here.